another 5 minute a day drawing exercise, a process that will really fast track your drawing improvement. This subject is the Australian flannel flower, and although it looks a bit like a daisy, it has a very distinctive difference, and that's the way the petals attach to the round central part. They don't just join on, if we look carefully at that front one, we can see that they actually curve down and then come back up from underneath to attach. And they attach at rather a thin point compared to the width of the petal in general. They have a somewhat delicate, almost spidery wave to them and shape to them. Some of their tips curve down, a few of them end up turning up. If we look at that upper left flannel flower, we can see something of the delicate shape side on. And they're called flannel flowers because they have a fairly thick, flannelly look and feel to them. And if you look carefully at the photo, and certainly if you see them in real life, the petals have a very discernible thickness to them. And that's why on a couple of them I've actually suggested an edge. So the important thing with this drawing is firstly that we understand how the flowers are formed, how the petal actually joins onto that central stalk. I drew a number of these many years ago in preparation for a painting that I never did, but it did force me to observe exactly how the petals were attached. And this is why we can't draw accurately. What we haven't seen accurately is so true. Once I've got this central one drawn, and you might have noticed too that as I was drawing each of the petals, I put a dot where I thought the tip of the petal was going to be in relation to the petals I'd already drawn. And that helped me to keep the proportions and the scale of the total roundness, if you like, of the flower roughly in place. And so now I position this opening bud behind a somewhat larger flower, or it may actually be an older flower that's closing up, ready to go to seed. I'm not exactly sure. This flower is the state flower of Victoria, one of Australia's southern states. And I wanted to do a little bit of hatching on this just to give an heightened indication of the way the petals kind of move in and out of their bending movement. This drawing, you're actually watching me draw double time. Believe it or not, these simple flowers are actually the most time-consuming subject that I've drawn in all of these 5-minute exercises. That they did take me 12 minutes to draw. And while I was tempted to stop sooner, I was really enjoying drawing them. I think they really are quite an exquisite flower. And I thought, well, I am saying now more 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, the 5-minute time limit really is just a notional one. The principle is that we do a quick drawing and that the very speed forces us to fuss less, to take more risks, to just put the lines out there, to get some confidence putting ink directly onto paper, and to learn to judge freehand by repetition. We won't get them all right, but by doing it over and over again, 5-10 minutes a day, we will learn a lot more quickly than doing longer drawings very infrequently. Now, I don't have much time left, but I do want to suggest just a little bit of the stalk, and just to give some indication of the very small and very kind of fuzzy rounded leaves that flannel flowers have. I don't think I know of any gardener who's managed to grow these in their garden, and yet just on the other side of the yard, so to speak, in the bush, they grow wild in the most sandy, desolate soil. I've even tried neglecting mine, and that didn't do any good. So now I just enjoy them when I go for a walk in the national park. So a little more indication of shadow. I've drawn this with a 0.1 millimeter pen. I normally draw these with a 0.3, but I just felt they were too delicate. I did do my roughing out, experimenting with marks drawing first with a 0.3, and it just looked too heavy, too blotchy. So I decided to switch to a 0.1 millimeter pen where probably the ink was starting to run dry just a little bit too much. So here's my 12-minute, 5-minute drawing. But certainly if you want to do 5 to 10 minutes, it's a great subject, and it's quite a beautiful subject. And of course, you'll find this and the other reference on my channel community page if you'd like to have a go drawing it yourself. But if you do, pay particular attention to how the petals join the central part of the flower. For our second 5-minute drawing subject, we go to the facade of the Musée du Louvre in Paris, and we look at one of the caryatids on the facade. Caryatids are simply columns that are in the shape of a female figure. And so I've drawn many of these just as part of the facade of the Louvre, but I've never singled one out to draw at this scale. So it's taking a little more attention than I've spent normally. But in fact, I still drew this in half the time I spent drawing the flowers we've just seen. So things aren't always as they seem. Now I'm just trying to get the head sorted. I'm not particularly practiced in faces, and so I'm playing around with the proportions there. And now work out the neck. And what I find with doing sculptures for architectural subjects is that I try and find the key points, the key pivot points, and particularly as there often is where there's drapery, where the drapery hangs, where it gathers and falls, and what the fundamental lines are and angles that the falling drapery makes in relationship to each other. Particularly where direction changes and where the fabric gathers. So that's what I'm trying to do at this point. I'm not thinking of a figure. I'm not trying to draw the figure of a woman. I'm trying to see the shapes that are being created and the lines and where they are in relationship to each other. And to basically copy it. I'm also taking advantage of negative space and of the shadowed areas that are formed. Now, this figure is being viewed slightly looking upwards, which means it is foreshortened. So the upper half of the body is compressed more than the lower half of the body. So the proportions won't quite be the same as if we were looking directly at this figure. Although notwithstanding that, I probably did narrow the upper part of the torso just a little bit too much. Another 2 millimeters, I think, would have worked well. Although there is an adjustment I make at the very end to the leg that's on the same side of her body as the ball that she's carrying. So I'll let you see me do that a bit later in a moment, and you'll see the effect that has, which I think does sort it better. So not that, but I put basically another line just under that one. So now a little bit of line work, and I'm just wondering exactly how much I'll do. And I think to my surprise at this stage, I realized I was only just over 5 minutes. So I have spent this up slightly, but it's almost real-time speed. And now I decide that as well as doing her hair and her headdress, I'll actually put the rather heavy, overbearing looking entablature that sits on top of her head on as well, just to, in a sense, provide a frame for her figure. But as I said, for me, certainly in drawing these, the trick is to not be thinking of a figure, but to be thinking of line and shape, negative space, and find particularly where the tension points of the fabric is, or where they are, in relationship to each other. But why not have a go at this in a 5 or 10 minute exercise? The worst you can do is learn something. And who knows, maybe you will produce an artwork in 5 or 10 minutes. I should have paid a little more attention to stacking that symmetrically, but never mind. So where do we stop? This is where it can be tempting to put too many lines, and I probably just have. So I'm pretty much finished my first iteration of this, just a little more work on the base. And then I'll leave it for just a second, and I come back and just add that extra line and see what. So this is how it looks without the extra line. And can you see now where I put that extra line just at the top of the thigh? I'll just point it out now to be clear, and there it is. I think it does help the proportions overall of the figure look more accurate. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you don't let the apparent complexity of this subject put you off trying to do it as a 5 to 10 minute drawing. As I said, I actually found it took me half the time that the apparently much more simple flowers took me. And the trick is to think of it not as a figure, but as a series of lines, of points, of shapes, and to seek to represent those, replicate those. So why not get the photo from my community page and have a go? But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have a good time. I'll see you next time. Bye.